So Snehal, before we get started, the RSA piece is really interesting. The reason why people come here, I think, is 20% technology and 80% people that you meet.
Yeah.
And I had a real pleasure hanging out with Horizon3 last night at the gathering you guys set up, and it was truly amazing to see the dynamics of practitioners coming together and having conversations that are outside of the realm of cybersecurity, because it's really all about people. And you were kind enough to divulge a story that I'd like for people to maybe to know, is like how you founded your way through college.
Oh, yeah. Well,
which shows that you're entrepreneur through and through, even before you became a successful CEO of a tech startup.
Yeah, well, thankfully the statute of limitations has expired on some of those things, but
without divulging too many details, because it was a smaller audience back then. So
yeah. Well, I think even before that, my dad came to the U.S. from India back in 1968. And he was an engineer, mm-hmm. and my grandfather was a very famous lawyer. And my people asked my dad, well, if he was a famous lawyer, why didn't you also become a lawyer? Your life would have been made. My dad's like, why? I didn't earn it. I'm going to earn everything that I do. And so he decided to do engineering because he had a passion for it. And then when he came to the U.S., he didn't take any money from his parents, so he could have, and he earned it. Right? He came here, worked his way through grad school part-time, worked part-time, and earned everything that he got.
And by the way, let me double click on that. That's, I think there's a lot of, this type of ethics. It's very rare. I would say very rare these days, but there's a lot of more self-funded entitlement these days, where somebody says, well, I deserve this. I need to, get handouts. I need help. You see that all across the board. Even now we're talking about the student loans getting paid and so on. So, but there's a lot of people that do not think that they entitled to it. They just work their way through and just make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. And that whole notion of earn the right to earn your way through, because you have to go through those challenges, the ups and downs, because that's the experience that leads to wisdom. And so when I graduated high school, same thing. Like, look, I'm going to figure out how to earn my. Even though my parents had money to pay my tuition, and they'd offered it up and so on and so forth, and whatever, I said I'm going to figure it out. And it was helpful that I had them as like the safety net, but I got a scholarship that paid for my first year of college, basically. And then for second year, like, well, what could I do to earn tuition money? So 3 friends and I, we rented a 2-floor townhouse at Purdue in a part of the campus called Benchmark, which is where all the parties would happen. And we had 2 speakers on the first floor, speaker wires up to the second floor. And we threw parties every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and made a ridiculous amount of profit all through sophomore year. And we used that to pay for tuition. We had a whole system, right? I had a whole system behind it. Yellow cups were beer, blue cups were jungle juice, red cups were both, $3 for one, $5 for both. I could see how many cups we issued each night, catch fraud, catch theft. Like, it was a pretty legit
That's like
system.
True engineering talk right there. Like, how you make sure that you understand the system and make sure you kind of draw it all out.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that was my sophomore year. And I was able to cover my tuition and living and so on that way. And I was very lucky. I got an internship to work at IBM after the summer of sophomore year, and then earned an intern salary during that time, and used that to kind of bootstrap how to pay for our junior year. And the whole thing, like, you can't get away with throwing, you can get away with throwing parties until your luck runs out. So that was not a sustainable solution. And so I used the money that I made from my internship at IBM, and I got very interested in stocks and stock trading. I said, well, I made $100 a day as an intern. What else could I do to make $100 a day? And this is, quote, laziness drives innovation. And so I went through and figured out, well, if I could buy a stock at $100, and if I could sell it at $101, and if I put 10 grand in, I'd make $100 for that day. And if I do that every day, there's my $100. So it got me into understanding the stock market, high frequency trading, positional trading, and so on. And I used my computer science skills as like a horizontal tool, and I studied and learned about finance. And so I go off and I started writing algorithms, and this is in 2000, to go off and understand stock price history and other pieces like that. And I got to the point where I came up with very clever ways to figure out how to buy and sell stocks. And so I started winning stock trading competitions I started winning money from these stock trading competitions. And then I was discovered, if you will, by folks in the business school. And then the folks in the business school gave me money to trade on behalf of like the business school's investment fund. And I got to go teach classes in investments, and a couple of professors took me under their wing, and I got to go learn how to do finance and investments. I got an offer to do a PhD in finance. I ended up not doing it. And that's how I paid for tuition junior year, internship in the summer between junior and then day traded stocks senior year.
You know, I listen to you, and I still feel that you have that sense of creativity today as a CEO of Horizon 3. Like you, the way you look at the company is you like, again, you were not really gaming the system, but you were figuring out a way to become more effective, you know, make some money, you know, figure out what the gaps are and how can I, you know, get advantage. And so as a CEO today of Horizon 3, you're always on the lookout for, you know, where the gaps are, how to market, you know, and you have almost kind of same elements as you were a junior in college, to apply now as a senior, you know, seasoned CEO of a startup company. You have almost the same mindset, right?
Yeah. In fact, so I grew up around computers engineering because of my dad, and I got very interested in like the offensive side of the house. I learned enough to not get in trouble, but enough to like be pretty dangerous. So when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, about 10 years ago now, and every year I pick a new subject to learn. So whether it's a new programming language, and not to be an expert, but enough to understand it, or a new database, or physics, or whatever else it might be. And I have a small group of friends, we'd pick different subjects and we'd all kind of learn it together. And so one year I said, I want to go get back into the offensive cyber side of the house. And I got Kali Linux up and running, and I start going through it. I'm like, damn, there's a lot of tools that I've got to go figure it out. And I had like stacks of books.
And Kali Linux, as like you open it up and it's like bam, like just the sheer amount of utilities on there, will make you very busy for a long time.
Exactly. And then back to laziness drives innovation. I said, you remember sneakers from back in the early 90s? Said there has to be a way for me to be able to push a button and let that figure out exactly what to orchestrate to execute. And this was 10 years ago. So I've been wrestling with this problem of how do I autonomously compromise an environment without having to have humans in the loop in any way. And it's a problem I wrestled with mentally for, a decade. And then I finally found the right group of people that had the expertise required to be able to understand how to attack, understand how to model the cyber terrain map that you discover, understand what to do to compromise the environment, and how to gift wrap that in a user experience that lets an IT admin or a network engineer with no security experience have the power of a 20-year pen testing veteran in 3 clicks.
And I think, Snehal, we're just very lucky that you were raised well. That you didn't end up, so you've ended up in the right side of the equation. I feel like if it wasn't the case, you would have been very successful doing something else.
Well, my mom reminds me that a slight decision left or right at any point in my life would have landed me in jail versus where I am. Which also earned a lot of street cred when I joined the special operations community, because they're just criminals that didn't get caught, right? Is what they really say about their backgrounds.
And it's such a fast moving environment, so I've been following Horizon 3 for a while now. And I feel like every time I meet you and we get a chance to talk, there's something new that is happening, whether you uncover something new and you've seen something new. Tell me a bit about what you just you mentioned to me yesterday, how you showed me a new use case, like how and maybe I'm not going to steal a thunder, maybe you can tell us about
so bank. we had a bank last week run an internal pen test. So once again, self-service, IT admin, junior in the company, 3 clicks and hits go. And they had a hybrid environment, so on-prem and then AWS. So they start on-prem with an initial access vector. And then from there, our product node 0 starts to discover the network. So it discovered 2,000 hosts on the network. It started fingerprinting every host, port, service running on all of those hosts in the network. It then found that HP ILO was running on one of the hosts, which is HP management software. And there was a known vulnerability, and it was able to successfully select the vulnerability and then exploit it.
And by the way, that's not in the top 10, right?
It's not in the top 10, right?
So just to double click on that, because that's the thing, but people don't realize it's not the top 10 that gets exploited.
Yeah, this is like a 7 or a 6 rated thing. Right. But we exploited ILO, and we were able to become admin and then dump the credentials on that box. We then use the credentials and reuse them to log in as admin to a Windows machine next door. From the Windows machine, we're able to pilfer the file system, search the file system, and we found the AWS admin credentials in a passwords file on that C drive. Pulled out the credential, successfully logged in as admin into their AWS VPC. It was amazing because 2 years ago, my pen test expert said this was impossible to do. So it kind of felt like my Watson moment, like the Watson Jeopardy moment, where we were watching this thing unfold and we're like, oh my God. And the entire attack took less than 2 hours to execute, the entire pen test across 2,000 hosts. Not a single security alert was triggered the entire time.
Yeah, because it was essentially just valid credentials.
Yeah, so the first thing, the exploiting ILO, most people don't even instrument the ILO server. It's just one of these weird fringe things. But it's actually quite a common piece of software. So that should have triggered an alert. However, once it didn't, everything else was a valid login. And there's this belief, attackers don't hack in with 0 days. They log in with valid credentials that they found elsewhere.
So how does Node Zero knows how to orchestrate all of that? What's the kind of the formula behind it in terms of, does it, has like almost like a logic that it tries like a hacker would do?
Yeah. So when you think about an actual cyber operator, right? Whether you're a hacker in the criminal sense or an offensive cyber operator in the military sense, once you gain initial access, you have a very regimented set of things that you do, like broad steps. You're going to discover the network and fingerprint everything that's there. And what you're going to do is you have to organize that data as you fingerprint the environment into something actionable for machines. So what Node Zero will do is build a knowledge graph that represents every host, port, service, credential, and so on that it uncovers. And once you've organized the data in this knowledge graph in the right way, and we call that a cyber terrain map, from there, it's all about next best actions. So based on what I've discovered in the environment, should I go after the router, the printer, or the television next? And that decision is based on outcomes we're trying to achieve. So as an attacker, your goal is to find a way to become domain admin, find a way to compromise a domain user, right? Elevate credentials, find a way to become domain user to gain access to the data they have access to, find a critical host like a vCenter or Cisco and borrow, or find sensitive data that you can take out, or destroy the environment if you can. And so when you know those are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, there are well-known machine learning principles, Markov decision processes, and reinforcement learning and other techniques that say, based on what I know, what is the next best action in order to achieve one of those objectives? And so what Node Zero will do is discover the environment, execute a next best action, learn a little bit more, like pop the credentials or find credentials, add it back to the knowledge base and the knowledge graph, and then use that to decide the next best action. So it's constantly taking an action, looking at the result, and deciding the next thing to do. And as a result, it's completely adaptive. So if the environment changes next week,
which it does,
which it happens all the time,
dynamic. Mm-hmm.
It will dynamically understand what do I know now and what can I do next.
And that's the thing. I think one of the issues with doing this like once a year or once a quarter is that the environment is so dynamic that you can have a snapshot of it and have a pen test one day, and then within a week it's very different. Whether through initial spin-off of services, whether through an acquisition of a third party or somebody else, it's not enough to do just at one point in time. And so, what was the reaction? And in this particular case, it was a financial institution without naming names. What was the reaction? Because typically they say the financials are in the kind of the top 10% of secure organization, yet all of that failed, and I'm sure they've already spent quite a bit of money to with resources and time and people and technology to protect their assets, but still got owned very, very quickly. What was the reaction?
Yeah, it was actually I think three distinct, almost like the stages of grief, right, to some degree. So at first they're like, no way, there's no way you did this, but we showed the actual attack path, the proof of exploitation of every step along the way, and then there's no doubt we did it.
So did you attach a counselor?
Yeah, I probably need to hire some psychiatrists and some counselors. So the first was denial. No way you did this. And then there was a bit of like, oh my God, how did you do this though? Like now you're digging and getting curious. And why did none of my security tools detect it was that question, right? Now your anger. I paid millions of dollars a year for defensive tools and nothing popped. What's going on? And they realize that these tools aren't designed to work together. They didn't configure them correctly. They didn't have the coverage. And then there's acceptance, which is, okay, here's the plan to improve my security posture on the defensive side. Here are the clear things I've got to take action to prevent this from happening again. And then the fourth stage is verification. Now that they've accepted it and they've taken the actions, now it's about verifying that those actions were corrected and actually worked. And then they start in this find, fix, verify type improvement of moving forward.
And do you sit down with the customer and walk them through what do they need to do to again fix those areas? Is that or do you pass it on to another third party?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. There's actually two parts to it. So the first is, because most of us at Horizon 3 were practitioners, we've all held the jobs of the people that we're working with. And we don't sell professional services, we don't sell consulting, but what we have is customer success on demand, anytime, anywhere. And there's a button in the product where anybody, and it's not throttled, you don't pay for it, you click it and it'll automatically schedule time with our customer success.
That's amazing. What made you, I mean, that's so let me just double click on that. So that's not trivial, because it costs money. You need to have the staff, and it's very costly staff. It's people that just know what they're doing. And this is not like junior level one. These are people that are practitioners. So why did you decide as a CEO to make that investment?
So security is so noisy. You're not going to win deals by putting your logo on the escalator at RSA. That's not how you're going to do it.
We're going to replay this, and I think you're going to create a lot of enemies.
It's fine, right? But the way you win in cybersecurity today is being authentic as a practitioner, right? Number one. You win on the quality of your documentation, because people need to understand what's happening. They're not going to believe like this Jedi mind trick hand wave of magically, this problem was caught. And they're going to win on the white glove customer support. And we actually don't have customer support. We have customer success. Customer support is a transactional relationship to fix a bug in the product. Customer success is investment in the strategic improvement of the user of our product.
So what happened? They click on the button, they set up an appointment, the practitioner comes up, and what's the process then?
And then they could talk about a particular pen test result that they don't understand, an explanation of what happened there. It could be, hey, they tried to fix it, but the fix isn't working. What should they do about it? It could be, hey, we're thinking about the zero trust stuff, and I know you've got some expertise. What do you think? So it's a security expert on demand. Now there's two parts. One is, once again, we win through that white glove customer success, and we build champions, and I want people to have Horizon 3 tattoos. But here's the other important part as a startup. All of that feedback about the product, and every time they ask somebody a question in customer success, that gets fed back into our product design and user experience process, and it is used to improve the usability of the product. So I actually, in a very unusual manner, scenario, I took my user experience and design team and UI team and embedded them in the customer success team to create an incredibly fast feedback loop between customer success and engineering. So as a result, over time, we'll see the button get used less and less. But up front, it has been critical in accelerating the improvement of user experience and features in the product.
And it's such an intricate, process, again, because it's complicated. Let's call a spade a spade. It's complicated. This tool is not. There's a lot, happening behind the scene. And you mentioned that you have emphasis on the documentation, but again, it's not trivial. Having great documentation is something that takes a lot of time and effort and requires constant massaging, because it's, again, the product continues to evolve. How do you maintain that fine balance between the product features and benefits, and then the supporting structure around it, like I said, like the documentation, the customer support, success, and so on? It's a very fine line. It's almost like you're pulling levers.
For sure, there's definitely a balance, and there are a few pieces to it. One is we measure failed customer interactions or degraded customer interactions. So if a customer took too long to log in, there's an alert triggered on the back end, and we're going to figure out what happened, and we're going to go off an improvement. So that's a basic customer support type activity to make sure that the customer has a enjoyable experience. The other part of it, though, we lump it all as explainability. Pen testing and like the offensive side of the house it's the mystical arts for most people. And our users are mostly IT admins and network engineers, where in 3 clicks they get the 20-year pen testing expertise. They're not offensive experts. So we have to invest heavily in improving the explainability of what they're seeing so they can understand it and credibly describe it to their peers and colleagues. So while I say documentation, really it's explainability as a strategic tenet of the user experience.
Yeah, and that's truly amazing. Again, because you put emphasis on something that's less and less on the kind of the marketing aspect of it, and more on the customer experience. And what happened when they let's say they find some results and they go ahead and fix it? There's that loop, that continuous loop, and there's going to be a point where you run the tool and there's less and less. Hopefully there's less and less alerts or less and less, vulnerabilities and findings. Would they come back and say, hold on for a second, is Node Zero not working?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So actually before that, you talk about marketing spend. In 2021, which was our first year of sales in the product, we spent less than $10,000 in marketing for the whole year. And the bulk of that expense was flying people out to Black Hat to hang out. Because you're not going to win customers through like some tchotchkes that you're handing out. You're going to win through your authenticity and the fact that you're going to help them, do their jobs better. So with that aside, we have a lot of instrumentation on the back end for the pen tests. How often do people run them? How many critical impacts were found? How quickly do they resolve them? How often do they reoccur? And if we don't find an issue, that's considered a failed customer interaction for us on the back end. And we surge to it like an FCI of like, wait a minute, we probably have a coverage issue here. What happened? What software do they have? How does that align with the attack coverage that we invest in? And unless they are truly amazing or they have a really awesome product that stopped us from doing it, which is great, no findings is an FCI.
Oh, no way. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it doesn't happen that often, right? It's like, what are the statistics?
So there's 2 reasons why. One is the environment is constantly changing. So new problems are being introduced all the time. And 2, attacker content is always evolving. And so when you've got that much change occurring both on the attacker side and the environment, you're bound to find it. All it takes, attackers only have to be right once. Defenders have to be right every single time. And
do they have them prioritize as well when they come across some? Because I'm sure some vulnerabilities, some things or findings are less severe, and potentially they can get to it at some point. But there are certain ones that are completely critical. Does the Node Zeros provide that insight?
Yeah. So there's 2 parts. One is just the way we prioritize delivering attacker content. So one thing is, if a vulnerability scanner will publish a list of 10,000 CVEs they look for. It's a list. That's not how attackers work. It's a combinatorics problem. I've got, let's just say, as an example, 10 ways to dump credentials, 10 ways to elevate privileges, and 10 misconfigurations that allow me to borrow. That's 10 times 10 times 10 combinations, actually more than that because you don't have to do all 3. But that's, 10 to the third combinations of ways these things could be executed in order to compromise an environment. So for us, it's not a list of problems to find. It's the combinatorics behind it of the way a low plus a low could equal a high. That's honestly a lot of our secret sauce. Now, how do we prioritize what to build in the product? Well, some of it is there are known issues that have high probability of success in leading to an outcome. Domain admin, sensitive data exposure. That's a no-brainer. We put that in. There are others that have high probability of enabling something significant to occur. Any place where we could dump credentials, as an example, and there's tons of ways to do it. And then finally, there are known misconfigurations or dangerous product defaults and so on that are constantly evolving that we keep an eye on in the market and then use to building, because it's the enabler to the outcome. And that's really how we think about the creation of attack content.
And when you hear about this, there's always this ever almost like these atom bombs, right? Like the Log4j, Log4Shell, and then beforehand, there's all this vulnerability. What is the experience like when you're, let's say, a Horizon 3 customer already, and something like that comes up, and then, the CISO gets a call from the CEO saying, hey, is this something we have to worry about? Where does the Node Zero come in and play? If what's the difference between that experience between being a Horizon 3 customer and not being a Horizon 3?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Log4Shell and a few others are rare, once in a few years vulnerability that very easy to exploit, catastrophic impact, right? And very common and pervasive. And so when Zero Logon came out, Log4Shell came out, there's a new F5 CVE that came out. We were actually the first to exploit it globally and build the exploit for it. When something like that comes out, we have a separate in the news process that we execute. And the goal is to get that attack into the product as fast as possible. And the whole company surges behind it. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but at this point, sadly, it's occurring more frequently than one would expect. And so the attack team surges to either find or build a reliable proof of exploit. And the key word there is a traditional ethical hacker only codes for the happy path, right? But in a real environment, you got to code for all the edge cases as well. So we'll try to find a reliable exploit, or we'll build our own and contribute it back to the community and get that into the product as fast as possible. It took 10 lines of Python to add and 45 minutes to add Zero Logon into the product. Once it's in, it's immediately available to every one of our customers. And honestly, anyone that signs up for a free trial gets it too, because we don't want to exploit crisis. We find that very sleazy.
That's kind of almost as bad as having your logo in an elevator.
Exactly. And then once we've got it in the product, it's an all hands effort between the marketing team, the customer success team, the sales team, and so on, where the customer success team will re-engage every single one of our customers and say, and honestly, even before that, we'll do a query across our knowledge graphs and say, who do we think is exploitable to this? And we'll do a very targeted, hey, customer one, we're fairly certain based on what we fingerprinted in your environment, you're like, this just happened with F5, the Atlassian bug. We've pulled a list of like 15 customers of ours that we were very confident were exploitable, and we proactively notify them, not as an alarmist, because we don't need more panic, but as here's why we think it is the issue, here's where we think it is, here's what you do about it, and if you want to verify it, go run a Node Zero pen test right now. And then the marketing and the sales team will re-engage all of our prospects and nurtures to say, once again, we can say, we're pretty certain based on what we fingerprinted before, this is an issue. Please log in for free, go try it out.
It's so interesting because you're not an evidence chaser, but you really provide that real value, because I think that's the number one thing is when something like that happens, the first thing an executive or somebody who's responsible for the network or the edge points is to figure out what is my exposure. So, because they see it, and the next thing, and they might be on vacation, they might be doing something else, and immediately there's phone calls and Zoom calls and whatever, they might stay, and they have to figure out what is the critical assets are now, exposed because of that. And this tool, how long will it take? So it took you, fairly quickly to enter that logic behind and find out. And then what's the process of running the tool if you're not a customer and you wanted to run the tool on the environment? Yeah.
So let's take like the Atlassian that just came out. And you're not a customer, you know nothing about it, and you see the attack engineering team's tweet on they've now figured it out, or a LinkedIn post from me or whatever else. Say, all right, I want to go verify that this is a real issue or not. You go to the website, you one-click log in with your LinkedIn ID or your Google ID. You don't have to be a customer. That immediately kicks off the free trial. And in a very specific in the news one, you're not running a full pen test. You're just going to go after that one problem. One click, it'd actually be 3 clicks, and you're now attacking your environment to see if you're exploitable at Atlassian, without paying any money, without having to talk to a salesperson, without dealing with any of that other stuff. Because once again, in crisis, time matters, panic matters, and you don't want to add more panic or more friction. You want to help our brothers and sisters do their jobs in the moment.
And you don't feel like there's a risk of them saying, thank you very much, it's been great, you kind of assisted me on this particular topic, and we'll move on. We'll see you with the next one.
Yeah, well, some people certainly would do that, but we're confident in the value we deliver in the product, that if that is the case, oftentimes it's because they don't have budget, not because we didn't deliver value. Because once again, when you are authentic and you're not a sleazy sales company, and you're not selling snake oil, there's a level of trust and rapport that builds, especially because in that moment, they are allowed to hit the button and ask questions.
Right. And that's the interesting piece, is that in time of crisis, that's when, even if you assist somebody with no cost, it carries, a long way. And when they do have the budget and budget comes back, or budget all of a sudden, get released, you're the first one in line. And that's super important. And again, it's part of the giving back to the community. Overall, everybody wins, right? So you also created a lot of champions, right? There's a lot of people that are huge Horizon 3 fans, right? And how you kind of building a very strong community around the tool. Tell me a bit about that. I know that you're also involved in the kind of veteran community and so on. How do you manage all those Horizon 3 fans and keep in touch with everybody on a regular basis, aside from doing events like this one?
Yeah, so there's two parts, and there's two distinct communities I want to talk about. The first is the people that will get Horizon 3 tattoos someday, right? And once again, those people are radical fans because of our authenticity and our results that did the talking. And for us, and that's a very precious relationship, and we do a lot of work to invest and maintain and incorporate and send that material and try to catch up when we can when we're in the local markets and that kind of stuff. And that's a very valuable radical champion relationship. And I actually learned that from my time at Splunk, because I literally, when I was Splunk CTO, met a person with a Splunk tattoo. And if you're in Splunk Trust, you wear a fez cap and a cape proudly, right? And the level of passion and energy in that user base, I was just in awe of, with the t-shirts and everything. And that's what was the real value in the Splunk community, was the passionate user base that they have. Now, how do you build that and replicate that? And that was actually a day one strategy for me in the company, which was when I hired Monty Canode, I said, Monty, you have 2 metrics for your performance. 3 metrics, sorry. Metric number 1 is how many radical champions can you cultivate? And that is his number 1 objective. I don't care if they're paying customers or not, radical champions. Number 2, failed customer interactions, degraded customer interactions. It's not the number, but the trend. If I see that going down, congratulations, you have a strong feedback loop to engineering. If I see that going up, unfortunately, you don't have the relationship with engineering that I demand of you. And that's been just a phenomenal, and that gives him clarity of he champions first, failed customer interactions second, right? And then from there, it's retention. If we do our job, we should have no regrettable attrition. And that becomes the third metric. And another key thing, customer success at Horizon 3 will never report to the sales team. Atypical, because at Splunk and everywhere else, it reported to the sales team. Never. Customer success will always report to the CEO directly, to me directly, because that team is my audit function. Because if the sales folks or marketing folks are ahead of their skis, they're going to see it. If the engineers are delivering poor quality product, they're going to see it. And they are accountable up and down for making sure that we hit those metrics.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And as a CEO, you make that investment in that team. It's not trivial. There's a lot at stake because you have limited funds and you have to know where to allocate, and you decide to allocate where, in your opinion, where it matters. And hopefully we'll get to see some people with Horizon 3 tattoos. Maybe you should have a template on your website so they can download it, so they can go out to the.
I like it.
That's the next step. And you have big plans for. Listen, you run large scale teams and so on, and you have big plans for Horizon 3. What are some of the kind of innovation that you're working on, if you can divulge some of that?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts. Actually, before I answer that question, yep. I want to talk about the other community piece, which is, so my military experience prior to joining Special Ops was watching Tropic Thunder and binge watching Jack Ryan. Right, I'm a computer scientist by education. It's an epic
movie, by the way, Tropic Thunder. It's
totally epic, right? Not a great way to mentally prepare for Special Ops, but you get the point. So when I joined, I left Splunk, financially retired, never wanted to work again, wanted to take a break and solve problems that mattered. So when I left and I joined the Joint Special Operations Commander, JSOC, as the first ever CTO responsible for all aspects of technology. When I first joined the military organization, I never felt so alone. I knew nothing about rank. All I knew about the missions was what I read or watched on TV, which wasn't very accurate. And so you keep your mouth shut, you learn, you listen, and you earn the credibility and the right to be on the team. And the thing about that community is just because you're here today doesn't mean you're going to be here tomorrow. You've got to earn your spot on that team every single day.
And I had a chance to interview General Howell, and this is one of the things he mentioned, that you managed to very quickly generate a lot of clout with the teams.
Yeah, it was amazing, right? Because those closest to the problem are the people you need to focus on, empower, and enable. And that became crystal clear to me on day one. And then from there, it's don't walk in thinking you know the environment. Keep your mouth shut, learn, listen, earn the right to be there. And then when you make change, make bold change to win. This is another thing. Oftentimes, people would come into an executive position worried about their jobs, their paychecks, or reputation. And then they play not to lose. They play to survive and stay on the radar. But in that community, if you're not playing to win and being bold and getting results the right way with collaboration and teaming and so on, why are you there? Go somewhere else. And so you play to win and you make bold, swift change. And, fast forward, we worked on some of the hardest, most meaningful problems of my life. It's something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And in fact, the way it inspired my kids was also just amazing to see. When I left the command, I never felt so alone because I came out and I had no common experiences with anybody around me. None of them could identify with the people I was with, the problems we solved,
the level of intensity,
and so on. And out of just luck for me, a third of Horizon 3 are former special operations or intelligence community professionals. And so as we had a common bond, we were able to assimilate. But what I realized is, and that was like a very abridged version of a veteran's transition. So when a veteran transitions from the military, I can only imagine how alone they feel. They have an amazing set of experiences, right? What makes people in special ops special is not that they can run far or swim fast. They are learn-it-alls that can solve any problem under pressure as a team. Incredibly valuable experience. And so what you do as these folks start transitioning out is understand their background and their story and help them translate that to a commercial narrative that represents what they could bring to the table. And what I found was, I started doing 2, 3, 4, 10 veterans transition kind of one-on-one meetings every single week at one point.
Wow.
And it became like, let me help you tell you your story. And so I became very passionate in helping to mobilize and enable that transition. And then I became actually quite aggravated because at the national level, the Israelis have done an amazing job bringing together their veteran community, 8200, think of Unit 8200 as an example, their venture capital community, their academic community, and corporate, fully integrated. And that's why they've done an amazing job producing hundreds of security unicorns, right? Whereas if a person from special operations walks into a tier 1 venture capital firm, they probably get escorted out by security because there's just no a brand and integration and strategy and so on. And so my personal goal after leaving the special operations community is that national security network should produce more unicorns than the Israelis in 10 years.
Just the economy of scales.
Yeah. I mean, they're out executing us 100 to 1. At least 100 unicorns for any one of ours. And there's amazing stuff that's been done, but we need to do a better job because those guys have amazing experience, amazing talent, can lead, have the perfect cultural fit for early stage startups. If you pair them with the right folks that understand go-to-market commercialization and you solve a problem that is commercially relevant first, that you can expand into federal later. Because what you don't want to do is boomerang them back to sell some bespoke DoD security. Solve a problem in industry, like autonomous pen testing, and eventually expand back into federal. That is how you build a $1 billion company.
Right.
And how do we do that at scale?
You also do that outside of Horizon 3, right? So you've you've participate in activities and foundation that helps veterans to assimilate into the workforce. And I think we can all benefit. And I think it's part of the national security. I think the reason why Israelis, for example, are so successful is that a lot of times they build it, for the in-house use. And I think the U.S. has to follow through as well. I mean, we all benefit from a Horizon 3 being very successful, as more. And I'm sure you do some work with the, some of the agencies as well. But the more we adopt these type of technologies, the more we are as a nation more secure.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a small community. You look at Shape Security as an example. They just got acquired for almost $1 billion, and the founder, the CEO, was a former fighter pilot, MIT grad, fighter pilot, goes on to be an assistant secretary of defense, starts Shape Security, grows it to almost $1 billion, sells it, and now he's in the venture capital community. You take another guy like Raj Shah, who's a close friend and a person I look up to. Raj, F-16 fighter pilot, started a company, sold it to Palo Alto Networks, started another company, went on to become the managing partner of DIUX, and now has his own venture capital firm focused on dual use type technologies. So we are starting to see this come up. Harpoon, Larson Jensen's a former Olympian, former SEAL, right? Stanford Business School, as a SEAL, went off and started a venture capital fund on dual use. So what we have are pockets of passion for this. But what we don't have is that like tier one VC firm that is going to make this a core part of their strategy because they believe in the talent we have in the United States.
Yeah, and it's really amazing. And it's really amazing the drive these people have, including yourself. As you mentioned, you could have retired several times by now, and you decided to go out there. And I don't think there's anybody who spends more time with people and customers than you do, and travel and seeing everybody. It's you really are one of a kind in a sense, or maybe maybe a few of a kinds of people that are really driven to be successful. And I'm sure that's what drives you now, is to be that success, nothing else, right?
It's less success, and this goes back to why I felt so comfortable in the special operations community. It's in this, I got this from my dad and my mom as well. Demand excellence of yourself, demand excellence of your teammates, and let your results do the talking. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's my core.
Yeah, amazing. And then let me ask you a couple questions about the kind of a current environment. We've seen the kind of tightening of the economic conditions, right? And so, what's your take on these valuations sometimes where you have, tremendous 100x or 150x or whatever, and then revenue not, what's your take on them all of a sudden, all the startups, especially in the cybersecurity space, that require to catch up on revenue to levels that potentially don't cannot sustain themselves. And maybe it's something that was when the conditions are great and there's free money and it's fine, but we've seen some changes that are occurring in the marketplace right now. What's your take on it?
For sure, I think there are. Let's talk about the as a founder raising money for a moment, and there are a couple of issues there. The first issue is oftentimes first time founders think that the glamour and glory is the big press release that they raised a $30 million Series A or a $50 million Series B or a $20 million seed, some crazy number. And so there's a lot of glory and glamour, and sadly the news cycle rewards a crazy raise at a crazy valuation. And first-time founders in particular don't recognize that they just gave up control of their company because they had to bring on multiple board seats to get that amount of value, and they have to grow into it. And if they don't grow into it, they're done. And there's an entire Silicon Valley episode on this down round, right? The other part of it is you do have predatorial investors as well. And there are investors that were going to prey on those first-time founders, give them a crazy valuation, and then ask for guaranteed returns in the term sheet. And so they're going to get their money. The founders may get zero at the end. So you have two problems kind of in that. You've got founders that I think over-rotate towards the glamour and the glory, and predatorial investors that enable it. So that'll always be there. But I think the more experienced executives and founders, the more experienced investors look at it differently. So take us as an example. We raised a $3.5 million seed out of 15.5 post-money valuation. very reasonable, very formulaic. Could I have pressured to get to 30 or 40?
Ooh, I'm sure with your credentials, it was almost a no-brainer.
But at probably a different venture capitalist, sure. But I picked the VC. So I'll tell you about how I picked Signal Fire as a VC firm. So I had a 22-page pitch deck for the seed round. Page 22 in backup was a frequently asked questions slide that had 5 questions in like a 3 or 4 sentences kind of paragraph reply, explanation for each of them. And I had maybe 25 to 50 different VC firms I talked to in over 100 meetings. Signal Fire was the only one in the first call when I called them up that said, hey, do you have any questions before I get started? And Walter and Ilya and Chris Farman, those guys said, hey, on page 22, question 4, line 3, you made this statement. Can you please explain that from your FAQ?
Wow.
And in my head, I'm like, these guys did their homework. They have high conviction. These are the folks I want to work with. And 2 weeks later, after we let our results do the talking, we had a founder-friendly term sheet ready to roll. So now I do my A round. And because we were very disciplined in product market fit, telling the story, and so on, in early commercial validation with alpha customers and whatever else, we had great line of sight to revenue. And so I talked to Signal Fire and we said, hey, look, should we raise a round? We could do an A round. We had some great inbound interest and so on. And Ilya's like, look, you could kind of do a really small A, carry a little bit of risk, but if you trust your ability to execute, set the conditions to a bigger B. So I ended up doing a $5 million A round on a $50 million post. I didn't have to give up a board seat. And it took 2 days, signed the piece of paper, and I got the money. And my colleague's like, oh man, $5 million A, that sucks. Like, you could have easily taken way more. I'm like, no, man. I didn't have to give up a board seat. I got to stay with an investor I already know well. And that was enough to get me to the next milestone. And as our results did the talking, I did a $30 million B round on a 180 post. Now, at that point, we had very strong inbound interest, but I found a VC I really liked, and the Signal Fire folks preempted again and said, we'll sign it, no board seat to give up, let's keep going.
Do you find these companies that are more conservative in terms of how they raise will be in a better position to potentially succeed? For example, you hear about some layoffs that are happening. That talent is now available for somebody like yourself to snap and benefit from.
Yeah, I think it's a balance of conservative in how you raise so you can more appropriately manage expectations, combined with conservative in how you spend. So when I was doing the A round, I talked about, I'll kind of be transparent about it, right? We have obscene gross margins, like incredibly high, 98.5% gross margins, which is unheard of in companies because we don't do any consulting, no professional services, pure SaaS. And so I used to tell investors at the A round how high gross margins is a competitive advantage. It gives me a lot of optionality to build a partner ecosystem. It gives me a lot of optionality in not having to fundraise a lot, because when we do a deal, most of that gets deposited in the bank versus getting paid out to cloud providers and whatever else. And the investors at the A round are like, we don't care about your gross margins, talk about growth. Like, okay, I got it. You do my thing. Now, gross margins is the difference between life and death.
That's right.
Right, for a company.
That's amazing. So, do you find that the type of raise the company is going to do now is going to slow down, or do you feel that it's going to continue the same, or maybe there's some tightening conditions where you're going to have to prove to real revenue?
It's an excellent question. I see 3 things happening. On kind of the one level, there are a number of companies that have been around for say 5 years or more. They are not cash flow positive. They don't have a path to cash flow positivity, and they're going to basically be sold for pennies on the dollar. And we're starting to see that occur because they're not going to be able to get raise venture capital without a massive down round. So they're going to end up getting sold for pennies on the dollar. I think you've got another group where their existing investors are quite committed, and those existing investors are going to get phenomenal terms and very cheap equity, if you will, to give that company longer life, and that those founders are going to lose control of their company and have a whole bunch of managerial overhead by the investor. The third type are the companies that are already taking off as rocket ships. And I think they're going to have sustained valuations or better valuations, because if you're already a winner, the other firms are going to want to double down on the winner to overcome the losses they're about to take. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see happening.
And I'm sure even at your position right now, I'm sure you have a lot of suitors, like people that come to you and say, Snehal, can you, are you open? And of course, everybody's got a price, but I'm assuming that's not your goal. I'm assuming you're going somewhere with Horizon 3.
Yeah. So back to, Godfrey Sullivan, who was the CEO at Splunk that hired me in, he did a great job framing the journey of the company. And he framed it in the context of a marathon. And he had, we are at mile marker 1 as a marathon banner on everyone's desks. And as we hit the next kind of major milestone in his mind, it's like, great, we're now at mile marker 3, mile marker 7, mile marker whatever. And it was a great way to remind everybody in the company how early in the marathon we still are, that we have to pace ourselves, but that we are running a marathon. And so for us, when I think about where we are, we're not even at mile marker 1 in our market opportunity, in our product, and in what we see in the market.
How do you communicate that now to the team? Because you grew exponentially as well, so you now have a larger group of people that are working with you. How do you communicate that kind of mantra?
So we do a couple of things, and in fact, it was taken as unusual by a lot of the new folks that came in. We are almost annoyingly transparent in the company. So every Friday, we have a 1 hour all hands, and the topic rotates. So the product engineering team gets an hour every Friday, and they do a deep dive of the product and what's coming out. The next week, the customer success team will do a deep dive on customers and adoption and so on. The third week, the go-to-market team will talk through what we're seeing in pipeline. So we kind of go product out. And then the fourth week is business operations and the CEO. And I will talk about where we are financially, where I see our burn, what are things that we can do to cut our burn, where are we going to make bets and investments. And we had some reorganization a couple of weeks ago in go-to-market to simplify things. And I was annoyingly detailed in what I saw in the data and why I thought we needed to restructure how we do inside sales, how we better connect that to marketing, how we drive deal qualification, and so on and so forth, and how we support tools to enable all this. And the feedback I got were, a couple of people like, hey, it was a little too much information. But most were like, oh my God, this is like everyone we hire could be a CEO and start their own company. That's my mindset. And so take the time to understand like the decision making, help me see my blind spots. I'll grow, you'll grow, and we'll all have better shared understanding as a result.
Do you ever have somebody saying, hey, this is like not for me, or this is not what I signed up for, because all of a sudden the level of intensity that is too much for them, or maybe it's not a good fit? Yeah,
for sure. Actually, so we had in September of last year 25 employees in the company, right? And we raised our B, and in February we had March we had 110.
That's incredible growth.
So we grew 4 to 5x in headcount over like a 6-month period of time. And there was a digestion period you go through when you gorge that much. Of those people, I think maybe 5% quit or were exited in 90 days after joining. And just because startups aren't for everybody, right? It's a totally different vibe. We're fully remote, so everyone works from their home environment. It's hard to adjust to. Results do the talking. There's a lot of intensity, and it's okay. Hey, great, we'll give you a recommendation. Sorry, it didn't work out. Startups aren't for everyone. You might be a better fit at, name your publicly traded company, where it's a little bit less intense. But we do so with the mindset of respectful discourse is the only discourse. Continuously proved. Don't whodunit, and find blame. You better be eager to collaborate, and that's usually the biggest one. We don't need kings and queens that own their little silos of excellence, or honestly silos of mediocrity to some degree, because we have to win and lose as a team. And oftentimes the people that get exited are the people that struggled to effectively collaborate, not only with their peers to their left and right, but to all levels of the organization.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I definitely see maybe some sort of a book in your future as well. You're gonna have to because it's like, listen, you have a hands-on knowledge, and what I also I noticed that you're not afraid to give it a try. So I'm sure that, again, you're as a first-time CEO of a startup, like, you are basically on the job training, and you took a lot of things that you learned at Splunk and at the JSON and so on, and you combine all of those into some sort of what you like to think is a cohesive way to be successful on all fronts. And I think what's interesting as well is that you tie it all up in an engineering mindset.
Yeah.
That make all the levers and make sure that you tune in the company that you want. And eventually, I think a company is the sum of all the executives and the founders. That's the DNA is such that it kind of trickles down to the organization as well.
For sure. And if you kind of go back to the culture of the company and what was kind of the most formative experience of my life in the special operations community, when you walk into the main building at JSOC, there's a big white display, big white kind of projector screen display, and it has the words "guts to try" on it. And this is something that really this is how I've kind of lived my entire life, but it really hit me, the story behind that phrase. So for those familiar with kind of World War II and the OSS and in the UK, the Special Air Service, the 22 SAS, their motto is "Who dares wins." Okay, and it's just incredibly famous, and it makes crystal clear the culture of that organization. And you fast forward to 1980, when you had the Iran hostage situation, and there was a mission that was executed by the United States to try to recover them, and that mission did not go well because they'd never really rehearsed joint combined activities like that before, and you had several lives lost and helicopters crashed. It was just really bad. And that was actually the catalyst for forming JSOC as a organization that was expertise at addressing and answering to crisis. At the end of that op, and you can imagine how people felt as their brothers were killed, preparing for the mission. An SAS operator, a member of the SAS, took a case of beer, took off the cardboard, and wrote on it, "To you all, from us all, for having the guts to try." And that became the motto of the company. And the reason why that really sticks to me is, look, we're all going to make mistakes. And if you're worried about how you look because you made a mistake, you're not going to have the guts to try. You're not going to push yourself. You're not going to demand excellence. You're not going to get better. You have to have the guts to try. And that's something, honestly, and I've got tons of other stories about how I had taken that approach throughout my career, where I didn't care about getting fired. As long as I felt I was doing the right thing in the right way, it's okay to take risk. Put yourself in a tough spot, as long as, if it doesn't work, your how you respond to that failure is how you get better the next time. But at least you had the guts to try something that was not necessarily a guaranteed outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an incredible story, and you follow that DNA, and you have a lot of responsibility to the people that work with you, that livelihood at stake, to the customers, to the investors, to your family. You put all of that on the line, including your own personal funds, right?
Yeah.
When you started the company, you put all of it on the line to make stuff happen. And I can't wait to see where Horizon 3 goes next. But until then, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you?
The Horizon3.ai website, you can find the company. Oftentimes people struggle to spell my name, so you'll get my name there on the About Us. But LinkedIn, I'm very open and reflective in my LinkedIn posts. And I'll always talk about lessons I've learned and a variety of experiences and so on. In fact, one of them was my experiences teaching my 3-year-old how to ski, because I taught him how to ski myself, and how that actually helped me become a better CEO. Because when you're teaching a 3-year-old how to ski, you've got to balance, when do you push them hard? When do you back off? How do you make sure it's fun? How do you, put them in a position to get better? And you've got to realize that even your organization has a tempo and a pace that they can handle. Sometimes you got to press hard, but you got to back off and give them time to breathe before you press hard again.
Yeah, they're like a 3-year-old, right? That you have to train and make it, mold them to what they want, the person they want it to be, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So LinkedIn's the best way.
Awesome, Snehal. Thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated, as always. Riveting conversation. Like I can't say anything else. But love to meet you in person next time. We're in some other state.
Yeah, at this pace, we'll be doing the world tour.
Perfect. Thank you very much again. Much appreciated. Thanks all for joining. Take care.